All right, guys. So today we're going to be working on understanding a few concepts that we've been struggling with earlier in the year. Our main goals for today are going to be the following. Is this on the camera? Yes, it is. So, students will be able to define intervals, define key, define scale, and maybe build. Actually, we're not going to do build chords. We'll say that for tomorrow. Define intervals, define key, define scale, and then know proper scale degree names. Okay, so four very different things that we're working on right here in order to understand. So the first thing that I have to understand is that I have this drawn up here on the board in bass clef and treble clef, so anyone can kind of follow along with what's going on. So when I move from a note to another note, I have to know how far apart that note is from something else. This is an important part of playing music, and it makes sure that I can talk about the musical terms without actually defining notes. Now, the reason why this is important is because songs transcend the notes on a page. If I play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, I can play that starting on a C, but I can also play that starting on a variety of different notes. The way that I do this is just by moving which note I'm starting on and making sure that the relationships, the amount of spaces between each note are the same. So, for instance, with what we have up here on the board, I have a C. If I wanted to play or a C scale, now, in order to understand why this is on the board, we have to understand first key signatures, or keys, and scales. So keys are how many sharps or flats I have in a piece of music. I'm going to say that again. The key is how many sharps or flats I have in a piece of music. Most often we see this in the form of our key signature. So if I look after my clef on each of these lines, there are no sharps or flats whatsoever. So that tells me that none of the notes that are listed here are sharps or flats unless they have an accidental next to them, which would be, a flat before the note or a sharp before the note, whatever. Since there are no accidentals and there are no sharps or flats at the beginning in our key signature, I can safely say that we are in the key of C major. Now, the way that I know that it's C major is a little bit more complex, and we're not going to get into that for today, but that's what the key is. Generally, when we're playing in band, we're playing in B flat major because the first note that we have is a B flat. I will also play in E flat major, and I will also play in F major in 6th grade. You can identify these by the songs that have one flat being the F major, the songs that have two flats being B flat major, or the songs that have three flats being an E flat major. Now, everything I'm saying right now is, of course, referring to the fact that we're talking about concert-pitched instruments, which means the first note that I am playing is the same note that it sounds. So for trumpets, we've talked about this before, when you guys play a C, it sounds like a B flat to everybody else. This is the same for the tenor sax, bass clarinet group. For the French horn, if you want to play a concert B flat, you have to play your F, which we've talked about before. And then for the E flat instrument, the saxophone, we've talked about how you have to play a G to sound like the B flat. So, for all these things, you're going to have to kind of think about this in the concert key. Not for the examples I'll do on the board, but when I'm talking about key signatures. So again, a key is the number of sharps or flats you have in the song, basically. Now, a scale is every possible note that I can hit in that key going from first to last. Now, if you remember, what I said before is that I know when I play in the key of C, I have no sharps or flats. And what you see here is the C scale. The scale is drawn out, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then I have my C again on top. It's the same notes on the treble clef line. You can follow along with the treble or bass. It doesn't matter. The same thing's happening for both of them, regardless of what instrument you play. So now I know what these two things are. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That's every possible note I can play in the key of C, starting and ending on C. Now, the reason I know that the C scale has no sharps or flats is because all major scales are constructed the same way. And that's by following a series of intervals. Now, intervals are a little bit of a complex topic, and we're looking at a simpler version of it today. But the basic principle is how many steps I have between every single note. Now, up here, I have 8 notes. But all in all, there are 12. If you don't remember this from the beginning of the year, I'm going to list them out below. I have C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and then C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. C is the same as the first one, doesn't count. Okay? If I'm going backwards the other way, I have C, B. A sharp is the same as B flat, A flat, G, G flat, F, E, E flat, D, D flat, and C. Now, if you see the way that I've drawn these out, it's because it represents a piano keyboard. If I went back through this again, I could very easily draw the keys like so. And you can see now it looks like a piano. Now the white keys that we have here on the bottom are the white keys we have in the piano. The black keys we have on top are the black keys on the keyboard. Now you'll notice that this right here doesn't have a label. That's because on an actual piano, there's not a key there. This is empty. Right? That space doesn't exist. Same thing on this one here. And then same thing on this one here. No key there. So here I have all of my various keys here. Now, in order to make a major scale sound, I have to make sure that I am playing the notes in a certain pattern. And that pattern is based on whole steps and half steps. Whole with a W, like it's the whole thing. Versus half step, which is half of something. So the way I define whole steps versus half steps is a half step is when I take the path from one note to the next closest note. A Whole step is when I take the path from one note, skip a note in between, and end up on the next note. So C to C sharp is a half step because I go to the next closest note available to me. C to D is a whole step because I had to skip the C sharp to get there. C to C sharp is a half step because it's the next closest note. C to D is a whole step because I had to skip a note to get there. The same thing works the opposite direction. If I go from G to G flat, that's a half step because it is the next closest note. If I go from G to F, that is a whole step because I am skipping a note in between the G flat. So, when I'm looking at the C scale, I have a whole step, C to D, a whole step, D to E, a half step, E to F, because there's nothing in between them, a whole step, F to G, a whole step, G to A whole step, A to B, and then a half step, B to C, because again, there's nothing in between them. This pattern of whole step, half step, whole step, half step, is how we make all of our major scales. Now, whole steps and half steps are intervals. They're the space that I have between keys. If I say it's a half step higher, the person who is playing the other instrument or singing the part that I'm talking to would know that they need to go up one note to the next closest note. If I said it's a whole step lower, they would know they need to go to the next lowest note, skipping a note in between. It's a way of communicating different degrees of music. Now, this is fine when I'm talking about pitches that are right next to each other, but if I am talking about pitches that are really far away, it becomes a little bit more confusing. Say I have C to G, I don't want to be like, well, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's 7 half steps away. That's hard to think about because now I have to count through the 7 half steps of how I get to C to G. If I'm thinking about steps in general, if I'm like, well, it's a whole, okay, so it's 4 whole steps, I'm still having to think. So we need ways to communicate these intervals faster. So basically the way it works is if I move up 1 degree of the scale, I just take the place in the scale that note is and give it a number. So let's look back up here at our notes. I start on C on both of them. C to D would be a second because I'm moving from the first note to the second note. So C to D is a second. If I'm moving from C to E, I'm going from the first note to the third note. So now I have an interval of a third. If I'm going from C to F, I'm going from the first note to the fourth note. So that's a fourth. And I can do this the entirety of the way up the scale, all the way up to the 7th, or the 8th, or the 9th. When we get to jazz, we can talk about the 11th and the 13th. Lots of crazy numbers up there. But it's all about moving from place to place. So, whole steps and half steps are intervals, but also seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths, and eighths are also intervals. Now, I can use these in a couple of different ways. The first way I can use these is I can talk about I'm going from the root, the first note, to the fifth, C to G. That's a pretty fast way of doing that. I can also start on whatever note I was left on last, the G, and say go a second higher. So now I'm talking about the note from G going to the second note after G would be my A. So at this point in time, we understand key, intervals, and scales. The next step that we're going to talk about is proper scale degree names, which is a little bit more of a complex topic. So I'm going to stop the recording here. I'm going to clear out the board, and then we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail. So when we're starting out with talking about scale degrees, we're going to be looking at these four first. These are the first, third, fifth, and seventh note of our scales, respectively. So the tonic is the first note that we have. Tonic is easy to remember if you think of tone. That's where that's going to be. The leading tone is my seventh note, which takes me back to the tonic. So the leading tone takes me back to the tone, the tonic. Okay. The dominant is the most dominant sound besides the tonic that I have in the scale. And then the mediant is in between, it's right in the middle of the tonic and dominant. That's where these names kind of come from, or not really come from, but it's how they make the most sense if you think about them in that regard. So tonic is my first note. Leading tone leads me back to the tonic. C is this tonic both times. Dominant, the most dominant sound that I have besides the tonic. And then mediant in between the tonic and dominant. This is the first, this is the fifth, this is the third, is right in between. So now, if we understand that we have prefixes that change these ideas, the next couple notes make sense. So above the tonic, I have the supertonic. It's above the tonic. That's really hard to read. I should have written that bigger. Oh well, you get the idea. Supertonic. Super meaning above. Below the dominant, I have the subdominant. It is less than the dominant. So, understanding the second and fourth are really, really easy as long as I get the names of the first, third, and fifth there. The only one of these names that's confusing a little bit is the sixth. The sixth is the submediant. Now, the reason why this is the submediant is because it's directly in between the tonic and the fourth. So if I look at starting on my subdominant, FAC, it's in between the two. It's still a mediant, but it's less interesting than the mediant between the tonic and the dominant. It's a little bit confusing. Now, the reason why these terms have stuck around for so long is because they're hyper-specific. If I say that I'm going to go to the fourth, most people will know what I mean. But I have to characterize that sometimes because some composers use a sharp fourth or a tritone. Or if I say I'm going to go to the sixth, I might have a raised sixth that a composer would have. If I say I'm going to go to the submediant, there's only the one specific note that I could possibly mean. So again, the 1 is tonic, the 2 is supertonic, 3 is mediant, 4 is subdominant, 5 is dominant, 6 is submediant, 7th is the leading tone. And then the high C is still the tonic because the tonic is there. For the next part of the assignment, you're going to need a piece of paper and a pencil or pen. You guys will answer the following questions to make sure that you guys have understood what is happening in the video. Now, I'm not going to collect these until I get back next week, and there's going to be one every single day. So if you're a person who's really struggled with the concepts that we've had so far in class today, you can always come to the channel on YouTube, watch the video again, and then take all the time that you want to answer the questions. So there's absolutely no rush overall if you really don't get this. But for class purposes, I'm only going to give you guys about 90 seconds on each of these questions before I move on to the next one. So your first question is, a key is, I want you to answer in a complete sentence with number one and writing a key is and finishing the sentence, and your time starts now. Question number two. A scale is 90 seconds, a full sentence with what a scale is. The next three questions that you have, all you have to do is say whether the following notes are a half step or a whole step, or whole step. So is C to C sharp a half step or a whole step? Is G flat to F a half step or a whole step? Is E flat to F a half step or a whole step? You have 30 seconds for each one to figure it out, starting now.
The next question takes the hardest thing that we worked on today and puts it into a long series of questions. So the next question will be worth 8 points, and what you'll do is specifically say the scale degrees of each parts of the scale. So in order to do this on your paper, you need to draw a staff with 8 notes starting on C. So I'm going to draw this in treble clef and bass clef so you can copy what I'm doing up here and make sure that it works. Treble clef. And bass clef. Now on each one of these, you need to go through with your pen or pencil and label each one with the scale degree. You will have 4 minutes to label all 8 notes with the proper name. Your time starts now. And now for the bonus point question. So this is a 2-point question worth 2 points if you miss it on the rest of the homework assignment. What is my cat's name? Question mark. 1 point for the first name, 1 point for the middle name. No points off for guessing. So that concludes today's video. You guys will have another 2 videos for if you're in the 6th grade class on Thursday and Friday respectively. If you are in the 7th and 8th grade class, this is the only video that you will see, and this is only on Friday. Yes, this is the Wednesday video for 6th grade, Friday video for 7th and 8th grade. Hopefully you all learned from this, and hopefully it gave you something to do. For the rest of the hour, you are to sit there quietly and do work for another class or read per the sub's instructions. Yeah, so anyway, hope you guys are having a good time. Practice a lot. We have a lot of work to do when I return. Don't forget that on the 26th we have an evening clinic with Diana Williams. It's very important that you're there. 4:30 to 7 that night. We'll be wearing uniforms for the performance for the parents at the end of it. So very, very important. Take care of that. Bye.